Welcome everybody to another edition of MLW 2004 here on TEW 2020, and yes, we're back on the saddle again, putting up videos, but since it's been a little while since I've had a video up, I just want to go over sort of lay of the land before we head on to the first show. So again, we're Major League Wrestling, it's November 2004, let's see here, best way to do this is, current world champion is still Steve Corino. He's defended against guys like Terry Funk and Sabu, Raven, Jerry Lynn, and Steve Williams twice. Our World Junior Heavyweight Champion is the Amazing Red, who just won the title back in September and defended it successfully against Jason Cross at Devil's Night, our last big show. And our global tag team crown champions are the Van Pitbulls of Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero, who won the titles at Devil's Night who retained the titles over Evans and TJ at Devil's Night. So there you go. And then as far as our storylines, just to go over those real quick. So we've got our Best in World storyline involving Bryan Danielson, Chris Hero. That's the wrong person, so let's remove him. I'll add the right person in a minute. Nigel McGuiness and Roderick Strong. We got the ECMO Sabu storyline. We got the storyline involving the Mlw World title, and of course Lynn's sort of feud with Homicide. We've got, Junior Heavyweight battle over the Junior Heavyweight in the Junior Heavyweight division, including some of the top stars. And then Tag Team Warfare, which is just all Maximos, Ricky Reyes, Rocky Romero, and the next contenders, Harry Smith and Teddy Hart. Just to go over things real quick to where we are. So, Devil's Night, we had Matt Sydal make his debut, also with Averno Delirious, Matt Sydal winning, SAT defeating, and Chad Collier defeating Michael Modest, Veteran Vampiro, and Queens and Puma. So, just a random tag team match. The Van Pitbulls retained their tag titles. Sabu defeating ECMO in Hardcore match. Loki defeated Homicide. Amazing Red defeated Jason Cross to retain the World Junior Heavyweight title. And in the War Games match, Jerry Lynn, Nigel McGuiness, and Roderick Strong defeating D-Lo, Simon Diamond, Steve Corino, and Bryan Danielson. And then in the end, Diamond basically turn on D-Lo, because that's the end of D-Lo's run here in MLW. Well, Bryan shakes, hands with them. Then on the post-show, we had Averno winning a 4-way. We had her Foundation agreeing to a tag match against each other next week. Vetter defeating Vampiro. And then the main event, Homicide and defeating Sabu. And then the big angle was Danielson saying no to being part of the Horsemen, as he's already best in the world. And then the next part of the taping was Matt Sydal getting another big win. Teddy Hart and Harry Smith defeating Jack Evans, TJ Wilson, and then there was a little tension, but then everybody hugged. And then Danielson promo saying he wanted a challenge, and then Simon Diamond and Steve Corino defeating the SAT, and then they beat down, but then all the baby faces involved in the big 5-way match at Fade to Black, running to the ring. So yeah, that is part of the War Game stipulation. Since the baby faces won, they all get a title shot versus Steve Corino in a 5-way match at the next big show, Fade to Black. But now it's time for the taping for the rest of the lead up to Fade to Black, so we'll do that, and then we'll likely also do Fade to Black. So I'll be back with that in just a moment. And welcome to the first show of the taping, as we're at MLW Underground taping here in St. Petersburg Armory. And we start out with basically the babyfaces backstage, and they go over the fact that at Fade to Black, even though it'll be they all want the title off Steve Corino, it's still going to be every man for himself, and whoever becomes world champion will be a regular champion. But they both agree to give everybody agrees to give 100%, even in tonight's tag match, which is basically just set up for later tonight, where it's going to be Jerry Lynn and Chris Hero taking on Nigel McGuiness and Roderick Strong in a big tune-up tag match. So yeah, this goes a couple minutes. Everybody does decently. This gets a 50. Not the best thing ever, but by far from the worst thing ever either. And then we move on to our first opening match, which is in a decent match. Averno defeated Pumo and Delirious in 7:07 when Averno pinned Pumo with an Averno driver. This is your sort of high spot special. Mask guy is going flippy all over. In the end, Averno gets the big win. He gets a 49. Our match itself gets a 49. Averno gets a 52 because he's awesome. Pumo gets a 33. Delirious gets a 46. And as we move on, Averno makes title belt motions basically after the match, and this gets a 34. We move on to where basically we have a quick promo with the Van Pitbulls saying, they took over the SAT a couple times. They took over one half of the Hearts at the last show, and they grew up in the streets. They aren't spoiled brats like the Hearts, so they'll take them apart at Fade to Black. 26, short promo, but these guys are what we call not good at the promos, but have to put them on TV. Then we have a Loki promo where, we have a start of a Loki promo, but basically he's attacked by Homicide before basically anything can even happen, and this begins another brawl between these guys as the sort of the, just feud continues. This gets a 49. Honestly, this is just sort of a placeholder, as I didn't have a ton for these guys to do tonight, and I just wanted to put them on the show to sort of further their feud as we, head towards Fade to Black. And it'll be announced basically later in the show, as that's our next official match on the show, as it's along with the the tag title match that's been announced. So we get this match as well. And yeah, so we'll go back to that. Go to our next segment, which is an bout that had decent reaction from the crowd, but subpar wrestling. Jason Cross defeated Matt Martell in 5:58 by pinfall to Crossfire. So this is just, straight ahead quasi squash match. Matt Martell gets a little bit of a comeback, but again, Jason Cross is a really good wrestler, so he gets the big win. This gets a 43, Jason Cross gets a 51, and Matt Martell gets a 28 because he's a jobber. And then Jason Cross celebrating only gets a 28, but that's okay as there's only 1 minute angle. Then we have a Veto Promo, which only gets a 38 because he's not the best promo guy in the world. But basically, he says his bandmates will be coming to MLW soon. And spoiler alert, I have no idea who these guys are because I just came up with this angle as I was doing the show. So, no forward planning at all. I'll figure out some guys as we go along. Then we have the Hearts backstage. There's still some tension, but at the end, basically, Jack Evans say, come on, let's go out and party. And everybody leaves. This gets a 30. And yeah, just building up these guys over this bit by new matches and these wacky backstage segments. And then in our main event, in a decent match, Jerry Lynn and Chris Hero defeated Roderick Strong and Nigel McGuiness in 1830 when Jerry Lynn submitted Roderick Strong. So starting this match is back and forth, totally killing. Strong and Nigel are actually the better tag team because they've been teaming up a little bit before. But Jerry Lynn's one of the best wrestlers, in the world. Chris Hero's a good youngster, so they fight and fight. But in the end, basically Roderick Strong, who has a bum shoulder, gets trapped in some sort of shoulder lock / cross arm lock and has to tap out. So Nigel McGuiness gets a 56, Roderick Strong gets a 42, Chris Hero gets a 34, Jerry Lynn gets a 47. Strong, remember his injury. Lynn and Hero off their game. Nigel's and Chris Lynn's gimmicks are stale, so I'll deal with that in a minute. But anyway, 51, perfectly solid tag match, especially because it was babyface versus babyface. And then, Strong is upset, sort of yells at Lynn for going after shoulder. Lynn says, this is all, this is still wrestling. I like you, but, this is professional wrestling after all. Don't wrestle if you're injured. And then Hero sort of stands Strong, there's some pushing. But then, basically Lynn comes back and remember, Corino's the enemy here, we're all just competitors. 45, short promo, again, not the greatest thing in the world, but just, these guys aren't huge charisma, but they're good wrestlers, and we're building up, them up as far as that goes. We move on, and the show is finished, and this gets a 48. So solid stuff, and we're building up towards the big show, which is in a couple weeks here, and I'll be back with the second show of the taping in just a moment. Alright, it's time for another edition of Underground, as we're doing the taping for the third week in November, as we're heading towards Fade to Black, and the show opens with basically Kevin Kelly putting with tonight's big main event is Loki versus Sabu. It's almost like my feud partner for Sabu is over in Japan and is not available for this month or something like that. But regardless, it's Loki versus Sabu on a big match for our main event tonight. Even as Loki has a big world title, not a world title, but has a big match to continue his feud with Homicide at Fade to Black. But this gets a 43 as it's just a quick 1 minute. Here's a picture of Loki and Sabu. Then we have our opening promo, which is basically Three Horsemen backstage. We've got Corino, we've got J.J. Dillon, we got Simon Diamond, all laughing at basically last week, saying, this just proves that Steve Corino is the smartest man in professional wrestling. As I took care of our weak link in the Three Horsemen. I made sure one of the best wrestlers in the world was on our side at War Games. But in the end, even though we lost, we still win because greed is with us all. So, no matter how high or noble you guys act, at the end of the day, you'll knife each other, you'll hit each other, you'll screw each other over to get this title, but at the end of the day, after Fade to Black, I'll walk out still the World Heavyweight Champion. And with the promo, everybody still laughs, and this gets a 59. You move on to our opening match, not our opening match, our opening match, which is in a decent match. Averno and the Amazing Red defeat Quance and Puma in 903, when Averno pinned Bobby Quance with a Averno driver. Amazing Red gets a 62, Averno gets a 52, Puma gets a 34, Bobby Quance gets a 34, Averno's off his game. This gets a 53 overall, like it's just a spot fest, puts over Averno again. And then basically after the match, we have a quick segment where basically Averno challenges Red, and Red accepts, and there's a handshake, and there's our next match for Fade to Black. It's Averno versus the Amazing Red with the light heavyweight title on the line. So we got that on the line. There we go. Big match, as Averno has been hot as hell since he came into the promotion, and Amazing Red has been one of the top, junior heavyweights in the company so far. Then after that, we have a SAT, basically backstage with the Hearts, who are with, Teddy and Harry, who are with Val, and basically, they make a challenge for next week. They make they never got a real, rematch versus the Pitbulls. Teddy explains, we got the title match, but, we'll have a match against you next weekend. Well, put it this way, if we win, regardless, if you guys win, we'll give you the first title shot. But if we win, you have our back at Fade to Black. And they agree, and there we go. We're off, and this is 31, because again, these guys, not the greatest promos in the world. Then we have a decent match. Bryan Danielson basically squashes Mdog 20 in 5:36 by submission with counter mutilation. This is just Danielson basically toying with Mdog 20 for most of the match. This still gets a 55 because Jesus Christ, Bryan Danielson is good at this wrestling thing. This gets a 57. Mdog 20 gets a 30. Overall gets a 55. And then Danielson says he still wants a challenge when Matt Sydal interrupts, and he basically says he's new here in MLW, but him and Danielson has run against each other before, and if you want a challenge at Fade to Black, I'll take you on. Danielson says, I beat you before Sydal in other places, and I'll beat you right here in MLW. Note, I forget whether they've actually faced off in ROH yet in real life, but whatever. I'm sure they wrestled in some indie before now. So that's another big match, as Sydal again has been another hot guy like Averno since his debut, and Danielson is of course probably our top non-Extreme Horseman heel. So this gets a 52 because Danielson is actually pretty good, and Sydal isn't the worst either at the charisma thing. Then we have basically Chris Hero training package. Just gets over Chris Hero's past history in professional wrestling, going up with Punk in the Chicago Indies, and now his success so far in MLW. This gets a 46 as it's just a straight, cute, short training package. Then move on to our main event, which is in a good match. Loki defeats Sabu in 14:34 by the Warrior's Way. So this, has some tables, has some chairs, but also has some really hard strikes, big suplexes, Loki fighting back, and eventually Loki getting the clean win over Sabu. Big win for Loki as he continues his sort of ascent up the card. Loki gets a 53, Sabu gets a 52. But of course, because he's Homicide comes in, hits a 187 on Loki, and sort of stands over him. And that finishes the show, which gets a 45, and the angle itself gets a 45, and the show itself gets a 53. So really good show, moves us forward to Fade to Black, and we've got the basically the go home show next week, and then the next thing will be the actual show. So we'll be back with that in just a moment. Alright, time for the final show before Fade to Black, as we basically start out with the babyfaces backstage, Strong and Strauss for a 6-man later tonight versus Steve Corino, Simon Diamond, and Homicide. This gets a 51. It's basically, they draw straws, and it turns out, everybody basically hides it, from the camera, so the heels don't know who they'll be facing later on tonight. This gets a 51. Not the best thing ever, but just a quick promo, just so he puts babyfaces over, and the big match at Fade to Black. So we move on to the next thing, which is our opening match, which is basically a decent match. The SAT draw with the Heart Foundation 2K3, who are, oh, whoops, I put the wrong guys in here. Well, not the end of the world. Teddy Hart and Jack Evans, basically, they draw when basically Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero just came involved, and they just come in with title belts, just swinging them, hit them at everybody. This gets a 39. Joel Jose gets a 48. Joel gets a 44. Jack Evans gets a 44. Teddy Hart gets a 31. So these are just high spots, galore. Then the heels run in and ruin things. So, they get Ricky, and Rocky gets a few more shots in, then they basically leave the ring, point at both guys, basically do a little, heel gloating, and then, all the babyfaces, rest of the babyfaces come out, there's an argument, and basically, we've got another match made for the Fade to Black, because even though they didn't win, the Heart Foundation, agreed that this was, screwed up, so instead of being versus Harry and Teddy, it's going to be Jose and Hole versus TJ and Jack Evans at the big show. This gets a 30 because, again, none of these guys are great talkers, but basically gets over the idea of what's going on. Then we have a Veto Promo again, putting over the fact that he's going to be putting together his bandmate soon. This gets a 36. Again, Veto's not the best promo guy in the world, but this is just, sort of still building his character. Then we move on to our next match, which is about had good heat and decent wrestling. Loki defeats Vampiro in 609 by pinfall the Warrior's Way. This gets a 50, which is better than I expected, actually. Loki gets a 54, Vampiro gets a 37. Same things, basically, his match with Habu. Lots of hard hits. I'm sure a chair gets involved. I'm sure Vampiro tries to do something wacky with fire, but Loki is Loki. He just fires back with hard shots, and he gets a win in about 6 minutes. Then afterwards, Loki hits a quick promo, basically ends with, "Homicide, you die." 46, because it's Loki, so promo guy, not the best. But again, puts him over as, a tough competitor as we move on to our next thing, which is basically a Strong them again his training package and going over their past in wrestling. They're teaming together against Supreme Horsemen, earlier this year, and, both shooting for the world title. This gets a 49, again, not the best thing ever, but sort of build these guys up before the big show. And then basically the three coming out tonight are Hero, Nigel, and Lynn. It's almost like one of these people are injured, so I don't really want them wrestling a bunch of matches or something. Anyway, this is just, these guys three coming out. This gets a 43. Not the biggest thing ever. Now it's main event time. And so, this is a back and forth 6-man. Everybody's getting involved. Everybody gets their spots in. But in the end, near the end, Loki comes out and basically, drags Homicide off behind the rest back. They start fighting. This is Corino just long enough for Lynn to come in and hit a cradle pile driver and get the big win. So this gets a 60. But yeah, in a good match, Nigel, Jerry Lynn, and Chris Hero defeats Corino, Diamond, and Homicide in 1507. As basically Kevin Kelly goes crazy over the fact that Jerry Lynn has pinned Steve Corino right in the middle of the ring. Hero gets a 37, Lynn gets a 49, Nigel gets a 61, Homicide gets a 48, Simon Diamond gets a 55, and Steve Corino gets a 71. And yeah, and the show ends with basically everybody brawling. Corino, using his title belt to fight off two guys, Homicide and Loki fighting, in the ringside area. Eventually we get the spot where basically, Hero accidentally hits Lynn. They get an argument that allows him to get advantage, and things just continue to break down as the show ends. This gets a 52. And as we finish the show, this gets a 52 overall. And before we move on to the actual pay-per-view, not the pay-per-view, but the big show, let's see if anything else interesting is happening in the news. And the next thing you guys will see will be Fade to Black. And survey says, let's see here how this pulls up. Okay, so news-wise, Simon Diamond, Teddy Hart, I don't disagree with you, Simon, but he's still a Hart. And we've got user talent. So, let's go our user. So, I think what we should do is actually, because we haven't had any real problems backstage, leadership is okay, Silver Tongue is okay, I think we need to get these guys a little cheaper. So let's do that, and we'll save that. But anyway, next thing up is Fade to Black, so you'll see that in just a moment. Okay, and now to end things for today, we've got MLW Fade to Black live from the beautiful Tampa DoubleTree Hotel in Tampa, Florida, in front of 1,200 people. And Kevin Kelly starts off the show, welcoming us to Fade to Black, going over the world title match, the big 5-way world title match tonight. And, basically doing, who do you want to win? And basically, bay faces get cheers, Steve Corino gets lots of boos, and there we go. Sure, starts out with the 45, but let's get rolling. So we start out with our, match results from last week where the Indianapolis got involved, so the SAT get another shot against Hart Foundation, and this time in a decent match, the SAT defeat TJ Wilson, and Jack Evans in 731 when Joel Maximo pinned Jack Evans with a Spanish Fly. TJ Wilson was the weak link, but, not the end of the world. This gets a 45, Joel gets a 47, Jose gets a 49, Jack Evans gets a 43, and TJ Wilson gets a 32. And yeah, and the game changes is just our referee week we bring in every month. Then, of course, post the match, we got a quick handshake between the Maximos, USAT, and Wilson Evans. Everybody's happy, gets a 35. There we go. Then we move on to our random 4-way match involving the lower card junior heavyweight guys, and about that decent reaction from the crowd with subpar wrestling. Delirious defeated Bobby Quance, Puma, and M-Dog 20 in 9/11 when Delirious pinned Bobby Quance with a panic attack. This gets a 35. Delirious gets the win. Bobby Quance gets a 31. Delirious gets a 45. Puma gets a 31. And M-Dog 20 gets a 33. Overall, this gets a 35. And Delirious celebrates the post-match. This gets a 49. Match was worse than expected because I put a couple high-spot matches right after each other, which was probably not the best idea. I should have took the high spot thing off the opening tag match, but what can you do? Delirious Celebrating gets a 49. Then we move on to our big tag team title match, as any bout had decent reaction from the crowd, but subpar wrestling. The Veto Pitbulls defeat Harry Smith and Teddy Hart in 10:36, when Rocky Romero pinned Teddy Hart with a 2Q missile crisis. This gets a 42, and as you can see, this is just a straight up clean win. Just, heels are slightly better wrestlers. Obviously, they cheat a little bit, before the match, but at the end, they hit the big move, and they get the win. This gets a 42, Rocky Romero gets a 34, Ricky raises up to a 50, and both members of the Hart Foundation gets a 30. But good stuff, solid tag title win for the Pitbulls, and after the match they celebrate to get a 39. Then we have our next big match, which is the continuation of the feud between Loki and Homicide, and in this, in a bout that had good heat and decent wrestling, Homicide defeats Loki in 9:51 by pin of the Cop Killer. This gets a 56, just back and forth, hardcore, big strikes, big moves, chairs, moves on the guardrail, brawl in the ringside area. By the end, Homicide is able to get just enough big moves in a row, get the big win over Loki. Loki gets a 54, Homicide gets a 48. Match itself gets a 56, like I said, and a big win for Homicide. And then Homicide celebrating gets a 50. Before we're Simon Dynamite, because a promo saying, it's a disgrace that one of the top men in Mlw don't have a match tonight. He continues, he's the diamond in the rough. Along with Corino, they're the stars of this company. And then Jason Cross comes out and says, if you want a match, I'll have a match with you tonight. And the referee comes out, and there we are. We got a match. This gets a 46. And about had good heat and decent wrestling, Simon Diamond defeats Jason Cross in 14:09 by pinfall the Simon Series. This gets a 53. Diamond gets a 52. Jason Cross gets a 46. Both guys were off their game, but a perfectly solid match, as just, gives him a win for Diamond. Because honestly, I don't want to say I haven't been using him correctly, but he's been sort of stuck in the tag division, and just a reminder, he's a strong, singles wrestler. And then Diamond celebrates, and this gets a 58. Solid stuff. Then we go backstage, where Jerry Lynn is about to do a promo, when all of a sudden, Homicide attacks him. Just, absolutely destroys him. Just, wallops him with a lead pipe, with a belt, throws him into, a wall, and he's left laying. Officials are totally on him, but Lynn just completely out of it. Okay. Lynn, I guess, is never going to have a good gimmick. But Orleans gets a 50, and all of a sudden, Jerry Lynn is now seemingly injured and maybe out of the main event tonight. We'll see. And Homicide, Homicide and Lynn have had a problem before, but also maybe, Homicide did just team up with the Extreme Horsemen, so maybe they gave him a little incentive to do it. Who knows? We might find out later. We might not, but overall, gets a 50. As we move on to our third match from the top, as in a good match, Bryan Danielson defeats Matt Sydal in 2028 by pinfall the roll-up. I imagine this is a match of, Bryan Danielson's small package of doom. This gets a 61, Bryan Danielson gets a 62, Matt Sydal gets a 52. Overall, this gets a 61, and then Danielson celebrating gets 64. So I should mention, just watch any good Bryan Danielson Matt Sydal match from this time period. Back and forth match, but Danielson, is still the best wrestler in the world, and he's able to get a quick little roll to get the big pinfall victory over Matt Sydal and continue his argument that, he is the best in the world. Anyway, as we move on to our semi-main event, as a bout had good heat and decent wrestling, Averno defeated Amazing Red in 15:21 by pinfall the Devil Wings, and Averno wins the Mlw World Junior Heavyweight title. So this is a back and forth, high flying junior heavyweight style match, but Averno's just that much better and hits the couple big moves and hits his Devil Wings to get the win and the title. Averno gets a 43, Amazing Red gets a 52. Unfortunately, it didn't click at all, which isn't the end of the world, but might adjust some plans for the future. But he's still 55 is a really good match considering the overness of these guys. And then Averno is given the belt by Red, and there's a handshake, which gets a 46. So it's main event time. Hero comes down. Nigel comes down. Roderick Strong comes down, still with a taped up shoulder. Then Steve Corino comes down with the world title, and he wins a promo basically, saying, oh, it's so sad that Steve Corino, that Jerry Lynn is able to wrestle tonight. I guess his dream of being world champion one more time will be a failure just like he is. And then all of a sudden, some music, some familiar music hits, and Loki comes out and basically, joins the match, and the match is set in motion. This gets a 56, and just set up so Loki has taken Jerry Lynn's place. So again, I'm just going to go over the match here. So Lynn, this is just a 5-way, basically, at first it looked like everybody's just going over Corino, but as with every 5-way match, especially in a match with a one-fall finish, eventually, Loki goes for a big move, on Corino, but Nigel sort of pops apart. Nigel and Loki start fighting. Hero and Strong start picking apart Corino, but Corino fights back, hits, Roderick's injured shoulder, but Hero's able to get some big moves. His hero's welcome, but then Loki hits him with a kick out of nowhere. Corino's able to take advantage again. But in the end, basically, sort of big move happens. But in the end, Loki is standing there, right Corino, and Corino gets nailed with the Warrior's Way. And 1, 2, 3. So yeah, and about had good heat and decent wrestling. Loki defeats Steve Corino, Chris Hero, Nigel McGuiness, and Roderick Strong in 1947 when Loki pins Steve Corino with the Warrior's Way. Corino gets a 67, Loki gets a 48, Chris Hero gets a 40, Nigel gets a 58, Roderick Strong gets a 42, 60. Really big win for Loki as he wins the world title, despite even not being set for this match. And then Loki celebrates in the show and gets a 42. And then 57 overall. So let's make a speech. Great performance for Loki. Actually, let's give point as a good example because he didn't bitch about losing the title. And hey, Matt Sydal, you're good. You're good at the wrestling. So just as a little peek behind backstage, basically I sort of noticed like Lynn wasn't doing that well in the ring because originally this was going to be like Lynn's big win to win the title, but I figured Lynn couldn't actually hold the title for that long. But I still wanted to give because obviously if Corino lost War Games, but then nothing else happened, he still kept the title, that would make no goddamn sense. But I did want to give the title to any of the 3 guys because even though they're getting over, they're not quite at that level yet. So since Loki has been a top guy, Homicide and Lynn have had a feud before, and there we go. Oh, of course, now you're fully fit. Let's see here. And I'll just look over Loki's overness. I won't go over everybody's. That's something I'll do for the next show, next video. But okay, Loki, popularity-wise, let's track his progress. So he was at. Oh right, let's actually get the Monday real quick, and then we'll see here. So if we look at Loki's popularity, not sort of a big bump in the Southeast, but no huge bumps anywhere else. Some slight bumps, but nowhere else. But he'll get there. Let's look at Steve Corino real quick. His popularity everywhere. Let's see here. Ooh, yikes! He actually took a decent bump. Well, not the end of the world. I can still rebuild him. You can be rebuilder. I can build him. You can be better. Let's see here. Anybody else had? Oh yeah. Let's check out Averno and Danielson. So Averno's really popular. And if we look at Danielson, I'm sure he's just eating up that popularity. Well, he's a little more popular. But yeah, I'll go over everybody else in the next video. But that's it for now. So it's December. Next show is King of Kings. Loki is our new world champion. Fan and Pitbulls are still our tag champion. Averno's our new junior heavyweight champion. Jerry Lynn is likely very upset, and I'm sure Homicide has some thoughts about the fact that he beat Loki tonight, and now Loki is the champion. But regardless, and also Steve Corino, probably very unhappy over getting screwed, quote unquote, because when Loki wasn't signed for the match. But regardless, that's it for now. Talk to you later, and adios.